It's a pleasure to be with you.
And it's time now for a quick break. But when we come back, in a three-way race between Biden and Trump and RFK Jr., polls show that RFK is getting 20% of the vote. We'll get into where the race stands with the 2024 election right around the corner. You don't want to miss it next here on The Backstory. Welcome back. I'm Rachel Blevins, and this is The Backstory. So there's a new Reuters Ipsos poll that shows Robert F. Kennedy Jr. getting 20% of the vote in a three-way race with President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump. 30% backed Biden in the poll, with 32% supporting Trump. Now, that online poll was just collecting the views of 1,006 adults across the country, but it is still notable when it comes down to it. Reuters is reporting that facing a likely choice between Trump or Biden in the 2024 race, many Americans are desperate for younger, less divisive options. A large and potentially consequential market for third-party candidates, one not seen since the 1990s, is a stark reminder that in Trump and Biden, the two major parties are likely to nominate unusually unpopular candidates, which is funny that they say that because in 2016, Trump and Hillary Clinton were the two most unpopular candidates ever. And then in 2020, I wouldn't say Biden was that much more popular, although the media tried to make him look that way. Now, the Reuters article goes on to say that their potential rematch of the 2020 election comes as the nation grapples with economic anxiety, a sharp political divide, a controversial U.S.-backed Israeli assault on Gaza, and widespread calls for a new generation of U.S. leadership. Some 63% of U.S. adults currently agree with the statement that the Republican and Democratic parties do such a poor job of representing the American people that a third major party is needed, according to a recent poll by Gallup. That is up 7 percentage points from a year ago and the highest since Gallup first asked the question in 2003. Biden and Trump both face primary challengers, but are expected to emerge as their party's candidate in 2024, despite concerns over Biden's age and Trump's string of federal and state criminal indictments. No third-party candidate has won a major U.S. presidential election, although they have at times played outsized roles as spoilers by taking votes from major party candidates, as the media always loves to blame them for. Back in 1992, billionaire businessman Ross Perot captured 19% of the vote, arguably swinging the White House to Democrat Bill Clinton over incumbent George H.W. Bush. Political activist Ralph Nader won less than 3% support in 2000, but took enough votes away from Democratic candidate Al Gore in Florida to give George W. Bush victory in the state, and with it, the White House. Now, a Reuters Ipsos poll shows that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is taking 20% in a three-way contest with Biden and Trump. Kennedy is backed by the American Values 2024 Super PAC, which has raised more than $17 million for his bid from several deep-pocketed donors, including a former Trump backer. Also going into the conversation, I know that anytime it comes to third-party candidates, it's always a conversation of who were they taking votes away from, and I know that with RFK, it's the debate over whether he's quote-unquote taking votes away from Trump or Biden. Notable here that he is a former Trump backer. American Values 2024 on Tuesday hosted an event aimed at Black and Latino voters in downtown Manhattan that drew about 40 people, including several who could not identify Kennedy's core policies, but said they valued his disruptive potential. Larry Sharp, a former Libertarian candidate for New York governor who attended the event, said, quote, "We've been looking for a rebel since Barack Obama. We thought he was a rebel, but then we thought Bernie Sanders was a rebel. Then we thought Trump was a rebel. Now we, of course, think JFK is a rebel. Well, they haven't been right so far, but you never know. Maybe they will get it with this go around, I guess you could say. Let's get into all of this with our next guest. Joining me now to discuss is Lori Spencer, a JFK historian and co-host of Strange Bedfellows. Lori, it's great to have you on the show today.
Good afternoon, Rachel. It's great to talk to you again. Hello.
Now, when it comes down to this latest poll, it's interesting because it really highlights the fact that many Americans are frustrated with this two-party system, right? They're frustrated with looking at another matchup of Trump versus Biden, and they're saying that there is a need for a major third party to emerge. That could also be a major independent candidate to emerge. Were you surprised to see Kennedy getting 20% of the vote in this latest Reuters poll?
Actually, I'm thrilled to see him doing even better than that. In the New York Times poll, it was about 24%. I think the Quinnipiac poll had him at 22%. And in terms of young voters, like Gen Z voters, he's up there above Biden and Trump. That's amazing. Honestly, I am surprised, even though I knew that Bobby could pull this off. From the very start of the race, when he got in, he was coming in with exceedingly high numbers from the very start. He was at 14% right out of the gate. And, I think the reason for that is maybe it's just because I'm a Gen Xer and I'm old enough to remember the days when our only two horrible choices were Bush or Clinton. And it seemed like every election cycle you had to choose between a Bush or a Clinton. But now it's a Biden or a Trump. And it's still two terrible choices, in my opinion. And I know I'm not alone. When I see those poll numbers, I know I'm not alone. And I also know that people are resonating with what Bobby has to say. They're resonating with his message. They're resonating with most of his policies. And I love to see it. It's very heartening for me. As you know, I've been trying to get Bobby to run since 2007. I was trying to get him to run against Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. But he wasn't about to run against Hillary Clinton because they were friends back in the day.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I know a lot of these people, I mean, he is someone, he obviously has the name recognition. And it comes at a time when, as you're noting, Americans are frustrated with still being in this two-party back and forth of kind of the elites to a certain extent. And I know that some people see Trump still as an anti-establishment candidate, but because he already has been the president, he also is part of that elite to a certain extent. Now, when it comes to looking for a third-party option and looking for, I know as some of the commentary coming from a recent event was saying, Americans love someone who looks like a rebel, right? They love someone who is going to be anti-establishment, who is going to really call out those in Washington. And I know that when it comes to Kennedy specifically on the entire issue of COVID, he has been someone who has been willing to go against the grain. He's been willing to be called a conspiracy theorist or anti-vaccine or what have you by the mainstream media. But in doing so and expressing his views and in challenging all of that, he has really done what many Americans either do or wish that they could do. Do you think that that is sort of what's behind what is drawing people to him at the moment?
Well, primarily, I think it's his message. He brings a message of restoring honesty to government, restoring trust in government. I think that's one of the biggest problems with our society right now is people have lost their faith in not just the media, but the government. And can you blame them? I'm kind of losing my faith too.
Yeah.
I feel like it's now or never. And I think a lot of Americans out there understand that Kennedy might be our last chance. I liked Donald Trump. I voted for Donald Trump in 2016, but he lost me right off the bat when I saw him packing his cabinet with swamp creatures. I mean, the reason we sent that man to Washington was to drain the swamp, and he hired the swamp. And then he went after Julian Assange, and he bombed Syria.
Yeah.
And he did a lot of things that I disagreed with. I felt like Trump didn't keep a lot of his key promises to the voters. And of course, he really lost me during the COVID pandemic and with, Operation Warp Speed. So I think part of the success of Bobby's campaign, of course, is it reflects the anger of the American people at their government and even at President Trump, which is why you see him pulling a lot of votes and a lot of people away from Team Trump, because they too feel betrayed by Trump. They voted for him once, they voted for him twice, and they, especially when it comes to the vaccines, Bobby's a big part of his plank is vaccine safety, and who brought us the lockdowns. It was Trump who brought us the vaccine mandates, and they didn't like the way he handled COVID. They don't like the way Biden's handled anything. And now you see some 70% of Democrats don't even want Joe Biden as their nominee. And it seems like the Democratic Party is just telling them, well, too bad, because he's going to be your nominee, so go vote for him. I was talking about Gen X a moment ago. I'm old enough to remember 1992. I voted in that election, and I remember Ross Perot. I remember the groundswell, the excitement that there was around Ross Perot, who was the last independent candidate to really do exceedingly well. He had, I think, 18% in the general election that year. Bobby's already passed that benchmark. If he can hold these numbers, and I think they're only going to go up, I think there's a real chance he can win.
Yeah, I would be interested to see a debate. I know that, of course, here in this country, we only let the two major parties really debate, but it would be interesting to see him on the debate stage, I think, against Trump and Biden, and to see them going at it over the issues. Now, it's interesting because talking about COVID, that's something that has affected all of us, right? Here at home, whether it affected your job or school or what have you. Another big topic is, of course, foreign policy. And I know that when it comes to Kennedy, he's been very outspoken about Israel. And I will say that's turned some people off to him, right? Some people have looked at him and said, well, because they want to hear something different than what they're hearing from the establishment. And they don't feel like what he's saying maybe is different, or maybe they just don't support his support of Israel and its ongoing bombardment of Gaza and its war with Hamas. When it comes to his decision to speak out about that and to be very outspoken about his support for Israel, do you think that that's something that comes from where he stands personally, or how do you view that, and how do you think that Americans view that?
I think the more jaded view that some people take is they say, well, he's only saying that because you can't get elected unless you support Israel. And there's truth to that. But in the case of Bobby Kennedy, this is a truly and deeply and sincerely held belief that he's had all of his life since he was a little kid. Most of what these values were instilled in him as a child by his father, Robert Kennedy Sr., who was a staunch supporter of Israel his entire career. His uncle, President Kennedy, supported Israel from its very founding in 1948 and throughout his presidency. It's just been in the Kennedy family. I don't know of a single Kennedy who doesn't support Israel. And of course, as we know, unfortunately, Bobby's father was murdered on the campaign trail in 1968. Now, some people believe that Sirhan Sirhan was not guilty. In fact, Bobby now believes that. He has actually visited Sirhan Sirhan in prison. He advocated for his release before the California Parole Board. But he did spend some 40 years of his life believing that a Palestinian man had murdered his father over his father's support for Israel. And if you really try to sit with that thought for just a moment, you can easily see why all of the RFK kids and his mother, Ethel Kennedy, continue to support Israel. I think when Bobby Kennedy was murdered on the campaign trail, they believe it was a political assassination over the Israel-Palestine conflict. It's really hard to blame them for only solidifying their support for Israel. And, Bobby believes to his core that Israel is the only true democracy in the Middle East. And some people may disagree with that. But when it comes to freedom and civil rights and human rights, Israel does have a better track record than most of its neighbors. He feels very strongly that we need that bulwark of democracy in the Middle East. And he does believe in the two-state solution. He wants to see Palestine have an honest government, a legitimately elected government. And I don't find that position unreasonable. I really don't. Especially when you compare that to the policies of Biden and Trump. I know Bobby is a man of peace. He's not a warmonger, even though some people have accused him of that lately. Obviously, he's going to stand by our ally. He feels that supporting Israel is not just a partisan issue. It's a matter of national policy. It has been since the establishment of Israel 80 years ago. And he's not going to abandon our ally in its time of need. So that's his position. And a lot of people are hoping he'll change his mind, but I don't think he will. He is solidly in the pro-Israel camp.
Yeah, it's interesting, and you do bring up some important points to think about his personal ties to it, and it always is the question of what are people voting based on? And there will be some people who will say, no, I will not vote for him based solely on that. There will also be people who say, well, I don't necessarily agree with him about that, or I wish he had worded it differently, but I'm still going to vote with him because I support him in other areas. It's just kind of whatever your deciding factor is at the end of the day. Now, I know that another thing that Americans are really concerned about, obviously, right now is the U.S. economy and the fact that we've seen prices go up on just about everything. The cost of living is unbearable in so many ways for so many different people. When it comes to Kennedy and his focus on the economy, do you think, because I know we always look at presidential candidates and we want them to have some sort of a plan to have this figured out. Do you think that he at least has enough of a plan to convince the American people of that when it comes to looking at ways to take on the U.S. economy as president?
I do. And when I look at Kennedy's proposed policies, I see a lot more concern for the struggle of the American people financially and fixing this broken machine than I see from Donald Trump when I look at Trump's proposed policies, when I look at what Biden has given us the last 3 years. I feel that Kennedy has the best plan. I really like his ideas to make housing more affordable, to bring prices down, to address our mental health crisis, our homelessness crisis. These are all things that are near and dear to his heart. And I see him, and I know because I volunteered on the campaign, I see how hard he's working on that. He is truly devoted to making America affordable again. In fact, that was the subject of a Twitter space that he hosted last week. And he talked about his policies with his supporters and the general public and anybody who wanted to listen for an hour. And I encourage people to go look at that space or listen to it. If you go to Kennedy's Twitter, you can look up the space. It's called Making America Affordable Again. And you can hear him detail his policies. Of course, it takes an hour, and I know we don't have an hour to go through it all. But if you're curious to get more details, that's a great place to find it. And also on his website, his policies are there at kennedy24.com.
All right, well noted. I'm sure people can go check that out if they have more questions, because I know that that's one thing in just reading about some of the latest polls. It's interesting because I always wonder when it comes to what people support, are they really doing the time to look in at the policies of the candidate that they're supporting? Because I know even just going back to 2020, there was a big emphasis on you're either voting for Trump or you're voting against Trump, right? It was so personality driven. And there is this desperate need here in this country to actually focus on policies and to also focus on making sure that the candidate who is elected carries out those policies, because that has been another big problem that we've seen is you have people like Obama and like Trump who run on a number of policies that they then don't implement when they get into office. When it comes to Kennedy and obviously his name recognition and his family history, do you think that he has more of an emphasis on really wanting those policies to be implemented instead of just saying, hey, this is what I'm running on, and then we'll figure it out if I get into the White House?
Knowing Bobby like I do, I think he's going to have his plans figured out. In fact, he already does most of them. The rest he's working on. There's still time to to figure the rest out, but he will have it figured out before Inauguration Day. And, his biggest problem is going to be the same problem that Trump faced. Any kind of outsider coming to D.C. with an intention to drain the swamp, the biggest problem is going to be the swamp. And in his case, Of course, my fear is the CIA is what he's going to be fighting. If we can even get him to the White House. I hate to even mention it today, but the 60th anniversary of his uncle's assassination is coming up next week on November 22nd. As you know, I'm a JFK historian. I've studied his murder for 40 years. And I truly believe, as Bobby believes, that the CIA was the architect of the assassination, carried it off, covered it up, and has continued to lie to the American people and obfuscate for the last 60 years. In fact, they still owe us thousands of documents that we've been trying to pull out of them through legislation and through litigation for the last 60 years. And we still don't have those documents. So I think the deep state is my biggest concern. If we can get Bobby to the White House, once he gets there, effecting the kind of change that he wants to bring, he's going to have a fight on his hands. That's the real challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that call to drain the swamp, while Trump put it into words, it is something that not only is there a need for it, but it's something that the American people want to see. Finally, we've got just over a minute left here. For people who are listening and who are, considering third-party options, absolutely, what would you encourage them to do, and what would you encourage them to keep in mind on their end?
Well, at least I'm happy to see the field of contenders is filling up this year with more and more options, so you don't have to choose just between Biden and Trump. Obviously, I hope you will choose Kennedy, but at least you have other options. If Kennedy's not your cup of tea, you've got Cornel West running independent. You've now got Jill Stein running again with the Green Party. It's good to see more options out there. I'm all for options for the voters. And if you do want to support Kennedy, I hope that you'll join us, join our team. I'm a volunteer recruiter, and we would love to have you. Just come on over to Kennedy24.com, sign up, and join our weekly Zoom meetings for volunteers, and we'll put you to work.
There you go. And I know I agree with you on the expanding field. It's good to see. I know Jill Stein has thrown her hat into the ring, and so it brings about hope when you have more contenders, obviously, and the hope on top of that is that the American people are able to see those names on the ballots and to really have a choice aside from just the two-party system. I appreciate you taking the time to join us today to break down all of the latest as we have these new poll numbers. Lori Spencer, a JFK historian and co-host of Strange Bedfellows, thank you so much for your time and insight today.
Thanks, Rachel. Talk to you soon.
And that's all for today's show. Be sure that you're following The Backstory on Rumble. That's where you can watch the video feed. You can join in on the live chat. And you can also find me on Twitter and Telegram at Rachel Blevins. Thank you so much to today's guest and our production staff and our control room over in DC for making this show possible. And of course, thank you for listening. We'll see you right back here next week on The Backstory.